Hi guys, Frank Gray, partner with the law firm of Jimeno and Gray. Here today to talk to you about child support, specifically how we calculate child support in Maryland using the child support guidelines. Sometimes you hear it called the Maryland Child Support Calculator. It's a formula that we use. So a couple of things I want to get out of the way first. In order to calculate child support, we have to have a common understanding about a couple of terms. And I'm going to give that to you up front. About halfway through, I'm actually going to do child support guidelines. You'll actually be able to see my screen. There are some timestamps down below if you want to come back and look at how I do those different versions. So click down below for the timestamps. So to talk about child support is one of the most common things that the court deals with. Anytime there's a custody case, anytime there's a divorce with minor kids, we're going to be talking about child support. Even if you go to the court thinking that you're not going to have to deal with child support, you are. A child support guidelines worksheet when there are minor children is mandatory in the state of Maryland. So let's spend a few minutes talking about a few definitions so that you can be better educated on what goes into the child support calculator. First of all, child support begins at the first pleading asking for child support. Even if it takes the court 6 months to get to the point of giving you a hearing, the court can backdate it to the original filing date and make you pay or enable you to get the money that you weren't paid those 6 months. It ends when a child turns 18 or graduates high school. In other words, if a child is still 18 but they're enrolled in high school still, you could actually keep paying child support all the way up until their 19th birthday if they're still enrolled in high school. So let's talk about a couple of definitions. The first is income. And income for the purposes of child support is a really expansive definition. It's not just what's on your taxes. It doesn't allow you to depreciate things or to take very many deductions like you do on your income tax return. It is a very broad definition. Remember, it's the income of a parent and only the two parents. Live-in girlfriends or boyfriends, new spouses, parents, things like that don't come into case. It's just the income of the parents. Basically, it's going to be income from all sources. Wages, overtime, tips, bonuses, dividends, pension income, commissions, trust income, and even expense reimbursement if you get paid back for expenses from your company. It can also include capital gains, severance pay, gifts, and even lottery and other gambling winnings. Two other definitions I want to get out of the way that have both changed relatively recently. The first is we have to talk about extraordinary medical expenses. The easiest way to think about extraordinary medical expenses, it's anything that your child may need not covered by insurance that's going to add up to $250 in any single calendar year. The most common examples are braces, medication expenses, or some kind of counseling or therapy if your child has to pay out of pocket on a regular basis. The other definition we have to get out of the way that has just changed on October 1st, 2020, this is for cases filed on or after October 1st, 2020, is the definition of shared physical custody has changed, and it is a big change. It used to be that in order to have shared physical custody, both parents had to have 35% of the overnights. That means each parent had to have 128 overnights. That standard has now lowered itself down to 25%. That's only 92 overnights. That means if you have 92 overnights out of 365, 25% of the overnights, you're going to get credit as a joint physical custodian. From 92 on up, the more overnights that you have, the more it impacts the child support guidelines. And in a second, when we get to the calculator, you're going to see that. All right, now we're going to shift and I'm going to show you my screen to actually calculate child support. This is a fictitious family I've come up with. Jane Doe versus John Doe. They have two children, Pete, age 11, and Mo, age 7. Now, I've given them these particular incomes for a reason. I've given mom $7,500 per month and dad $5,500 per month. Remember, child support guidelines, the formula only goes up to a combined $15,000 combined for the family per month. This is before taxes. We're talking before tax money. If your family averages $15,001 a month, technically you're an above guidelines case. There's 3 different ways the court can do it. You still have to do a child support guidelines worksheet. But I'll tell you, in my experience, the court almost always extrapolates the guidelines. What that means is in the formula that we use, the calculator that most lawyers in the courts use, that algorithm just continues into infinity at that $15,000 mark. And we basically use that as the parameters for what it should be above $15,000. But what I've done here is I've given mom an income of $7,500 a month. That's the equivalent of $90,000 a year. I've given dad $5,500 a month. That's a little over $60,000 a year. And I put them at the threshold for joint physical custody. So the dad has 92 overnights, mom has 273 overnights. So dad has that minimum magical 25%. And with this formula right now, he would pay $751. Let's start to play with the numbers and see what happens. Let's assume that mom is paying child support for another child, not of this relationship with this father, but another. Let's assume she's paying $1,000 a month for another child. So you can see what that does is that takes the income that's available for this family down $1,000 a month. In other words, because that order already exists, we're going to take that money out of her income before we use her income to figure out what child support is going to be. Here are some of the most common expenses that we see. Work-related daycare expense. When your kids are really young, it can be a crippling expense. It can easily be $300, $350 a week. I'm going to assume that the 7-year-old still needs some work-related daycare expense, and I'm going to assume that mom is paying $150 a week. That's $650 a month. And you can see that brings dad's number up because dad's paying a proportionate share of that amount. Now let's assume for a second that instead of mom paying it, let's assume that dad is paying that. You can see that dad's number goes down because it's taken into account that dad's paying this other expense. Health insurance. So the health insurance payment isn't the total health insurance payment for the family. What we do is we look at how much it would be for just mom or dad, and then we figure out what the difference is to add the kids or the rest of the family. Let's assume that mom is paying for the kids, and let's assume it's $120 a month. So you can see dad's number goes up a little bit there. Now let's blow this up and let's do it a different way. Let's assume that dad's the actual physical custodian, that mom didn't get 25% of the overnights. And you can see what happens is when we do that, the numbers totally flip. Now mom is paying $1,748 a month to dad. That is a huge difference compared to where we just were. Let's mix things up again. Let's add another child. So it's Pete, Mo, and Lori, who's 1. We're going to assume for purposes that mom is the sole custodian. We're going to assume that there's a big daycare expense. Let's call it $350 a week. So you can see that $350 a week daycare expense, when you take it out on a monthly basis, really ramps up the number that dad is going to have to pay. When we take out that extra daycare expense for dad, now dad owes $1,931 a month for 3 kids. Why is it so high? Well, it's because mom is the sole physical custodian. Dad doesn't have that 25% mark for the overnights. There's a huge work-related daycare expense of $350 a month. And mom is paying the health insurance payments. Let's do another family. Let's take out Lori. Let's take out Mo. Let's assume that there's just Pete, who's age 11. This time we're going to have mom and dad making almost the same amount of money. Mom's going to make $7,500. Dad's going to make $6,500. We're going to make it joint custody. And we're actually going to take up those numbers of overnights. So now we have 50-50 custody. We're going to take out the work-related daycare expense because Pete's 11, he doesn't need it. And you can see that in this scenario, mom actually pays a little bit. Well, why is mom paying a little bit? Mom's paying a little bit because she makes a little more money. Even though she's paying the health insurance payment, she's making a little more money. That's an overview of the guidelines. I've given you a very flyover overview. For more information on this topic and a lot of other family law topics, visit our website, which is linked down below. There's also a link for a book that we will provide for you that'll go more in depth into this and a bunch of other family law topics. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.